Hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about finding the volumes of cylinders, cones, and spheres. It is expected that you know how to not only find these volumes, but you also memorize the equations. Now, before we begin, it's best to know that volume is the amount inside a 3D object. So the amount of water that you put in a cup, for example, that amount of water is the volume. So let's get started. Before we go to any equation, it is important to remember the distance between diameter and radius. Now, both of these terms come from a part of a circle. Now, the diameter is the distance all the way across the circle. This is going to be something that you might see in your papers, but we don't actually need the diameter in order to calculate the volume of cylinders, cones, or spheres. Instead, what we're looking for is what's called the radius, and that is half the distance across the circle. So if you're given a diameter that's the distance all the way across, you are going to need to divide it by 2. So the radius is half the diameter. If you do not take your diameter and divide it by 2, then you're going to have the wrong answer every single time because we always want the radius. And sometimes the radius is given to you, which is great. It makes our life a whole lot easier. So here we go. We're going to be finding the volume of a cylinder first. So a cylinder is best represented by looking at a cup. So the cup is that circular shape and it comes straight up. So before we go on, usually pi, which we're going to be using in all 3 of these volumes, I'm going to use as 3.14. If you plug it in your calculator, you might get more numbers that are attached to it. Your answer is not wrong. You just have different decimals. We just want to make sure that you're as accurate as you can. So in my example, I'm going to use 3.14. If you use pi on your calculator, it might be slightly off. So the first step in finding the cylinder is to find the radius of the object. Remember, if they give you the diameter, you need to divide it by 2. You also should find the height. So taking a look at our first example, I have the distance from half the circle all the way into the edge. That means I have the radius, which is great. So I have a radius of 2. Then the height from the bottom of the object all the way up to the top is going to be 6 in this case. Great, I've identified my radius and my height. Now I'm going to plug in this information into the equation. Volume equals pi r squared times the height. So what they're doing is they're taking the circle, which is represented with pi r squared. That's how you find the area of a circle, and then you have to multiply it by the height. So it's like little layers stacked on top of each other. So I know that I'm trying to find my v, so I just replace it with v. Pi, again, is 3.14. I am abbreviating it. In most cases they do. Sometimes the decimals go a little bit further, but it shouldn't be too far off. The radius in this case is 2 that I need to square, and my height is 6. From here, I'm going to use order of operations to solve. So order of operations means that we're going to do parentheses first. We don't have anything inside the parentheses but individual numbers. So we're going to move on to exponents. So I'm going to do my exponents first. And I know that 2 squared is 2 times 2, which equals 6. Now I'm going to move on to calculating going from left to right, since this is all multiplication. And 3.14 times 4 is going to be 12 and 56 hundredths. And I need to multiply that by 6. And I'm going to get an answer of 75 and 36 hundredths. I want to make sure that I label it. That's my last and final step. Since these are in centimeters, I'm going to put centimeters and I'm going to cube it since it's volume. Now, if you wait to round to the very last possible moment, so at your answer, your final answer is going to be more accurate. So if this number right here went on forever and I just left it in my calculator and did times 6, my answer is going to be a lot more accurate than if I round right up here. Okay, let's move on to the cone. So the cone is very similar to what we have done before. We're actually going to continue with the same steps. The only thing that's going to be different is we're going to plug it into a new equation. So again, my radius is going to be 3 and my height is going to be 10. It's very important to identify that first. And if you have a diameter, you need to divide it by 2 before you begin. Now I'm going to plug in to the equation v equals 1/3 pi r squared times the height. Notice how the only difference between the other equation and this equation is that we are multiplying it by 1/3. So I'm going to plug in what I know. I know that 1/3 and I know pi. My radius is going to be 3 and I want to make sure I square it, and my height is 10. Same thing as last time, I'm going to start using order of operations. So that means I have to square it first. And if you don't want to write this out, I completely understand, but the more you write out, the more accurate you can be and see where any mistakes are that you have. After I've squared, I need to do 1/3 times pi, which again, if you round right away, your answer is going to be slightly off. So if I just keep it in my calculator, I have the 6 repeating at the end. And I keep multiplying, I'm going to have 9 24 hundredths times 10. And then I'm going to have my final answer of 94 2 tenths inches cubed. Because again, the label is super important. You need to make sure that your unit, whatever you have, is cubed. So it's the same process as the cone, or sorry, as the cylinder. We're just using a different equation. And our last and final one is going to be the sphere. The sphere, it's the same steps again, except the equation's a little bit different. You have to first identify the radius. This does not have a height to it, but I do know that in this case, my radius is 4. If it went all the way across, I would have to divide by 2. So really pay attention to that line right there. The equation I'm plugging it into is going to be volume is equal to 4/3 pi r cubed. So that's a little different than what we have in the previous examples. The last one, r was squared. This example, r is cubed. So make sure we're memorizing these equations. But then it's the same steps as before. We're plugging in what we know and solving using order of operations. So I have my 4/3. I know pi is 3.14, and I know my radius is going to be cubed in this case, and this is my first example, or first thing I'm going to do. So I have 4 cubed, which is going to be 64. And then I multiply going across. So again, if you want the most accurate answer, you're going to leave whatever you have in your calculator as you multiply across. And my final answer is 267 95 hundredths. And again, I need to have a label at the end. So it's a lot of plug and chug going through it, but it's very important that you remember what the equations are and what steps you have to take. A lot of this you can put in your calculator, but you need to make sure you're doing it in the right step. The calculator is only as smart as you. Good luck. I know you can do it. Just take your time and know that if you want the most accurate answer, you are going to not round as early as you can. Just wait until round to the end. Thank you and good luck.